Welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Tesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on this beautiful Wednesday morning. It's about 9 a.m. Depending on wherever it is that you're tuning in from to the world of sport. Anyways, it's a bit of a kind of cloudy, cold, beautiful morning down in Kampala, where we do come to you live from, and we are glad to be back. Thank you so much, and welcome to the community, to all our new community members, those of you that have recently joined the club, the Football Tribe UG community. It's a pleasure to have you around. I hope you do stay for long, and I hope you enjoy your stay while you're here. It's a sports channel. It's a football community channel where we do get to engage with the fans about their clubs, about what they think about football, different aspects of the game on and off the pitch. And this morning will be no different, because we'll be discussing whether Alexander Isak will leave Newcastle this summer. Now, this comes on the backdrop of a couple of statements that have been put out by both the player and the club in that order. That sort of, we thought that while we did discuss this topic last night, we ought to give it another go at it, because it's just not going to go away for as long as this transfer window persists, for as long as this transfer window remains open. It's that kind of talk or conversation that is not going to go away. Anyways, allow me the absolute honors of having our audios tested before we can continue any further for purposes of clarity in this broadcast this morning. One too many times we've had false starts when it comes to our audios, so usually whenever I have the chance to, I make sure we do test our audios before moving on any further. But with that said, I wish to say thank you to every single one of you that managed to catch last night's podcast. Thank you so much for sparing the moment to be part of the broadcast last night. For those of you that did participate in that very fruitful conversation, we are back to extend that topic further and see where the journey leads us. But the Alexander Isak story is one that is not going to go away anytime soon, and we will continue to debate it, we will continue to discuss it, and depending on whatever shifting angles or dimensions that may come with the story. I think in typical journalism, this is what they would regard as a developing story. It's not yet concluded. We do not know where it will end. So it's one that continues. And we will keep our eyes peeled to it and see. We know that Liverpool are interested in signing Alexander Isak. We know that before, Arsenal moved in for Victor Gyökeres, they were interested in Alexander Isak. So basically, the interest from other clubs for the 25-year-old Swedish striker is an open secret, and it's well known, it's well documented. However, some of that information came out light, or the situation between the club and the player came out, I think, a little bit late, that many suitors had been discouraged previously to make bids or to try and make moves for the player. So for those of you that are just joining me this beautiful morning, my name is Robert Tesakos, like I said, and I'm coming to you live from Kampala, Uganda. Please do me the absolute honor and like this podcast, but also consider subscribing to the channel and help me on my journey to 2,000 subscribers. Please do me that absolute honor and favor. So the question this morning, or the topic this morning, we are asking, will Alexander Isak leave Newcastle this summer? I do not think at this point or this stage we do have a definite answer for that particular question to say definitely will leave or definitely he won't be leaving. However, we've gotten ourselves a couple of indicators here and there to suggest that maybe, just maybe, he could stay at the club. But also, while we speak in that respect, there's another half of us that believes that an exit is very, very possible. And that has everything to do with the statements that have come out. Yesterday, Alexander Isak, being absent at the PFA Awards, put out a statement expressing his gratefulness for having been put or voted among the PFA team of the year. But that notwithstanding, apologies on the internet glitch. Unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this, these kinds of things tend to happen to us. Internet dropping, and then some of you drop off. But anyways, like I was saying, Newcastle did put out a statement in response to what Alexander Isak had put out in the work of being away at the PFA Awards. So here's what Alexander Isak's statement did say. He said, "I'm proud to be recognized by my fellow professionals with a place in the PFA Premier League team of the season for 2024-2025. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. I want to thank my teammates and everyone at Newcastle United who has supported me along the way. I'm not at the ceremony tonight with everything going on. It didn't feel right to be there." So that's Alexander Isak. He went on to say that I have kept quiet for a long time while others have spoken. The silence has allowed people to push their own version of events, even though they know it doesn't reflect what was already said and agreed behind closed doors. So what was agreed behind closed doors? We're going to find out what that was in this very podcast. The reality is that promises were made, and the club has known my position for a long time. To now act as if issues are only emerging is misleading. When promises are broken and trust is lost, the relationship can't continue. That's where things are for me right now, and why change is in the best interest of everyone, not just myself. And signed off Alexander Isak. Now, in response to that statement, Newcastle did say this, or had this to say. They said, "We are disappointed to have been alerted to a social media post by Alexander Isak this evening. Hi, I can't pronounce your name. Is it Ains4RX12? Hi, how are you? Where are you joining us from this beautiful morning?" So Newcastle in response said, "We are disappointed to have been alerted to a social media post by Alexander Isak." I'm from Kampala, Uganda. Thanks for asking. Where are you from? We are clear in response that Alex remains under contract and that no commitment has ever been made by a club official that Alex can leave Newcastle United this summer. We want to keep our best players, but we also understand that players have their own wishes and we listen to their views. As explained to Alex and his representatives, we must always take into consideration the best interests of Newcastle United, the team, and our supporters in all decisions, and we have been clear that the conditions for a sale this summer have not transpired. We do not foresee those conditions being met. This is a proud football club with proud traditions, and we strive to retain our family feel. Alex remains a part of our family and will be welcomed back when he is ready to rejoin his teammates. That was the statement by Newcastle. You say you're from Turkey. How is Turkey? We have a couple of colleagues from Turkey, one of them being called Safa Ali, who is a Fenerbahce fan. So now we're going to digest these two statements by the club on their own merits, because, and it is true what Alexander Isak says, that for a large part he's remained silent during the course of this transfer saga. It's been the club speaking, and it's not like the club were at will or spoke at will. It's because the manager in Ed Howe is all before the cameras, before the media on a weekly basis, and he's been almost on every single opportunity been asked about the situation with Alexander Isak, and he always provided an update. Of course, he himself, I'm sure he would love to have had this this impasse put to bed, as soon as possible. Hello, Majin. Hi, how are you doing? Where are you joining us from this beautiful morning? So here's the backdrop of this Alexander Isak scenario. Now, Alexander Isak, in this particular statement, he did say something I found very, very profound. He said that the reality is that promises were made, and the club has known my position for a long time. To now act as if the issues are only emerging is misleading. What were those promises? Now, from what we are hearing, or from what we've been hearing, you're from Netherlands. Okay, that's beautiful. I think you're this like the second person we're hearing from on the channel to be from Netherlands. But welcome to the Football Tribe UG community. So we did hear reports sometime in July this summer that apparently Alexander Isak had been promised an improved contract at Newcastle. Now, due to managerial changes within the club, that contract never lived to see the light of day. Now, it was not to say that it would never happen, but again, he seems to communicate or to suggest that there had been a gentleman's agreement between him and club officials, So that agreement or that gentleman's agreement seems to have not been met. Now, according to reports, Amanda Stevali, who was in the control of the club with her husband, Madad Guadosi, who are in charge of the club or the day-to-day running of affairs of the club, seem to apparently are the ones who made these promises to Alexander Isak. Now, again, remember Amanda Stevali was very, very crucial in the Saudi Public Investment Fund, taking control or buying 80% stake in Newcastle, taking over from Dan Ashworth. So she was very pivotal. She acquired about 10% of that, and another 10% went to a different entity, with the Saudis owning 80% of Newcastle. Now, at the time, Newcastle had no sporting director, they had no CEO, so they chose to leave the everyday running of the club affairs to Amanda Stevali and her husband. They did that tremendously well, and so oversaw the incoming of Ed Howe as a manager in 2021. Fast forward 2022-2023, Ed Howe guides them to qualifications in the UEFA Champions League. Now, at some point, Amanda Stevali and her husband, Madad Guadosi, are forced out of the club. Not forced, maybe forced is too big a word, but are sort of pushed out of the club or steered away from the club in terms of day-to-day affairs. At that point, a CEO was appointed, that is Darren Eales. Darren Eales was appointed as CEO, who then himself appointed the club sporting director in Dan Ashworth. Now, with those two co-owners leaving the club, eventually it did not. It's upon that backdrop that it is reported that some promises had been made to Alexander Isak, and we're going to get to that. Who saw the Isak post? I think I did. Hello, Pedri. Good morning. How are you doing this beautiful morning? You say, "Are you Africa?" Okay, I didn't get that. Then Ronaldowski. I don't know what language you've typed in. Pedro was saying, read my comments, please. I've read them. Ronaldowski, where are you joining us from? Are you from Czech Republic? Are you from Poland? Are you from Russia? Oh, that's Turkish. Well, apologies. My language library is one that is very limited. Okay, good to have you from Turkey. So basically, that is what happened. Now, when Amanda Stevali and her husband leave the club, and Darren Eales, and before they leave, when Darren Eales is appointed as CEO and brings in that Ashworth as sporting director, Amanda Stevali's sort of roles within the club sort of shrunk a bit in terms of the responsibilities, in terms of her everyday work and scope and things like that. So looks like that's the kind of direction that the Saudis wanted to take, at the time of those appointments, or at the time of making those moves. So the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia own 80%. Then, as her her role, that's Amanda Stevali, reduced within Newcastle. She relinquished 4% of her shares in the club. She relinquished 4% of her shares within the club to the other third-party entity that co-owns Newcastle. I'm trying to see if I can remember the particular name of that entity, but it's not coming quickly to recollection. But if I do find it somewhere, I'll be letting you know, really. So yes, actually they're called the Robben brothers, So they bought another 4% from Amanda Stevali as her role within Newcastle continued to shrink. Now, fast forward, Danny Ashworth is let go at the club. And you remember, he went to join Manchester United as sporting director. Never mind that only after 5 months, he was equally shown the exit at Old Trafford. That notwithstanding, he was then replaced by Paul Mitchell. Now, Paul Mitchell had worked with Darren Eales at Tottenham Hotspurs. They had worked together. So he is brought in at Newcastle. That was in July 2024. Now, at that point, after the 2023-2024 season, that's when Alexander Isak had been promised this apparent improved contract by Amanda Stevali and the husband, Madad Godosi, So we are at the end of the 2023-2024 campaign. Those two leave, and in comes Paul Mitchell to join Darren Eales, who, after Dan Ashworth had exited the club. So at that point, apparently Paul Mitchell ruffled a lot of feathers in that club, inside the club, including saying to Alexander Isak and his representatives that the promises they were talking about in terms of a new improved contract for the player in Alexander Isak won't be met. Now, he was not saying they will never be met. He was just saying at that point in time, it was not priority, because at that point, we're destined for the start of the 2024-2025 Premier League season. So that meant that Alexander Isak still had 4 years left to his current contract. Now, Paul Mitchell, as new sporting director, assessed that situation and decided, no, we're not giving you an improved contract at this point. One, you're already one of our best players. Two, you still have 4 years left to your contract. Now, as a show of discontentedness for what Alexander Isak and his representatives deemed as a break of trust, or as a betrayal, or as the club failing to live to its own promises, because you see, when you make promises on part of an entity, those promises are held to that entity, not to the individual that occupies a position within that entity. I'll give you an example. So, for example, let's say you're a father figure in a home. If you make a promise to a toy, to a child, as a father figure, not biological father, you just say using semantics here or metaphors, you're making literally that promise on behalf of that family. That's what you're doing. And then if you exit before fulfilling that promise, that means whoever occupies your role as father figure is bound to live to those promises. But maybe the family level is too small a unit. Let's take it to organizational level. Take an example. Let's say you have a conversation with your HR, and your HR promises you, we're going to improve your payment by 10%, and then suddenly 2 months down the road, that HR is leaving leaves the company, and then before completing the actual increment, and then you have a new incoming HR who you sit down with and say, look here, with your predecessor, we had sat down, we had this kind of conversation, ABCD, and we had arrived to this. Panesh says free Isak, and then you inform them that, look here, my conversation with your predecessor, we had arrived to this stage and said the company was going to improve my pay by 10%. So you find that word as binding, because the HR at that point was speaking on behalf of the company, was acting in the role of or in the interests of the company. Now, because there is a change of personnel in positions at the HR level, that doesn't mean that the company should negate on their promises of offering you that. Lock him up in the north. That's Frederick saying no, that Alexander Isak shouldn't be afraid. He should be locked up in the north. So basically, that's the situation that is happening at Newcastle with Alexander Isak. So Isak and his representatives have had to sit down with Amanda Stevali and the club representatives at the time during the 2022-2023 season. At that point, during the 2023-2024 season, at that point, conversations were had. Remember, that was his second season at the club. He had improved in performances, scored 21 goals, provided 3 assists in the Premier League alone. So clearly, he might have felt that maybe his pay needed to reflect his contribution on the turf, which the club thought they should reward, and those promises were made. Now, fast forward, the change in leadership with Paul Mitchell and Darren Ailes. I'll speak to Isak's representatives and say, look, we are not in a good position when it comes to the profit and sustainability rules. You still have 4 years left to your current contract. I do not think we shall be renewing your contract just at this moment. Maybe it's a discussion we can have in the near future, but not at this moment. So that, I think that's what Alexander Isak talks about when he says when promises are broken, because initially he says the reality is that promises were made. So those were the promises that were made to Alexander Isak for an improved contract at Newcastle. In fact, some reports go as said as much to suggest that he had been promised 300 grand a week, but that has not been widely reported, but it has been mentioned in some reports. So when he says further that when promises are broken, trust is lost. So he's talking about those promises which the club have failed to live up to or to fulfill, saying that those promises have been broken, and therefore there has been a breakdown in trust, or trust has been lost, and the relationship cannot continue. That means the relationship between him and the club, that is Newcastle, cannot continue due to those broken promises. That's where Alexander Isak is coming from. White Gaming Channel says hi. Hi, White Gaming Channel. Good to have you on the podcast. Kindly consider subscribing to the channel if it's your first time here, but also like this podcast. Now, that takes us to the Newcastle statement. In Newcastle's statement, they say, we are clear in response to Alex, he remains under contract and no commitment has ever been made by a club official that Alex can leave Newcastle United this summer. I think Newcastle United should allow Isak to leave. Okay, that's his opinion. What do you guys think about this whole situation? Now, the club are saying that at no point was Alexander Isak promised that he would leave this summer. Remember, while answering the question, will Alexander Isak leave the club this summer, or will he leave Newcastle this summer? Now, this could be true, and I'm not saying it is definitely true. I'm saying it could be true, and we'll get to the why. Now, in every talk that has been had, there's no point where the club promises Alexander Isak that he will be allowed to leave at the end of the season. However, what Alexander Isak talks about in terms of lost, broken trust or broken promises, and hence leading to lost trust, what he is implying to, what he is inferring to at that point is a contract promise. Now, once Paul Mitchell walked in and told him and his representatives that there won't be any contract at that point, Alexander Isak at that point or during that period told the club that last season would be his final season at Newcastle. Why? Promises were made, promises have not been lived to, and then hence a breakdown in relationship due to lost trust. So at that point, Alexander Isak feels betrayed and informs the club, this will be my final season at the club, which was last season, 2024-2025. They went on to have a very good season, won the Carabao Cup, their first major trophy in 71 years, qualified for the UEFA Champions League when they finished 5th on that Premier League table. So, again, the club have been informed. Now, here is where I revert back to my opinion that I think Alexander Isak has not behaved professionally in this transfer saga. You may agree with me, you may disagree, but it is in my school of thought that he's not behaved professionally. Here's why. Now, yes, promises were made and promises were broken as per Alexander Isak. But when you're under a professional contract as a football player, just because you tell the club you want to leave does not obligate the club to facilitate you leave. It does not obligate the club to sell you just because you said you want to leave. So, but for as long as you remain at that club, the expectation is that you will continue to execute your duties or at the very least behave in a professional manner. And I do not think Alexander Isak refusing to go on a pre-season tour by requesting to be left out of the squad is behaving professionally. So he refuses to go to a pre-season tour in Asia with Newcastle. He remains at the club, goes to his former club, Real Sociedad, at the Zubizieta, facility, and he trains there alone by himself. Now, prior to the return of the clubs of the club from the Asian tour, he returns back to the UK, and the hope was that he would reintegrate and train with the rest of the squad. Eddie Howe said no to that. Possibly, I would want to think he's saying no to that. One, to punish the player for his behavior. Two, to also say, for as long as your situation is not resolved with the club, I do not think it is within our best interest to have you within the rest of the group. We do not want any bad apple spoiling the basket. One rotten tomato can, rot an entire basket in that school of thought. So that's where the club are saying nobody promised Alexander Isak that you will be allowed to leave this summer. It does not say that Alex never told them he would want to leave this summer. So Alex told them he would want to leave this summer. Club officials never said, okay, you will be allowed to leave. No, they did not say that. So the statement from Newcastle further says that we want to keep our best players. And that's what we've been saying. If you lose your best players, then eventually others fall like dominoes. Once you start losing your best players, others lose the morale in this kind of project that you say you're building. For as long as there is interest for them, they can equally walk away. So, Newcastle continue to say that, as explained, to Alex and his representatives, we must always take into consideration the best interests of Newcastle United, the team, and our supporters in all decisions. And we have been clear that conditions for a sale this summer have not transpired. Now, you see, the key word here is conditions for a sale this summer. Now, that means that the club are not saying the player is not for sale. They are saying if he is to be sold, certain conditions must be met. And yesterday we were discussing this last night, for those of you that managed to catch the broadcast. We were saying, assume you have an asset, maybe a car. You do not want to sell that car. But you're saying, if certain conditions were met, you will be open to selling the car. So that's the position of Newcastle with Alexander Isak. Ideally, they do not want to sell Alexander Isak. But, and this is a big but, if certain conditions are met, then maybe they will consider a sale. So, assuming you have your car, what's the most common car that you can have? Okay, let's assume you have a Nissan Micra. I do not know if many of you know a Nissan Micra, but you can Google it and see those images. Very small car. Let's say you have a Nissan Micra and you're saying that car is worth $10,000. But remember, your principle is it is not for sale. But you're saying if somebody gave you $10,000, you will consider a sale. So in other words, the actual market value for the car could be anywhere between $5,000 to $6,000, but you're saying, and you do not want to sell. But if somebody offered you $10,000, you could consider selling the car. So basically, that's where Newcastle are with Alexander Isak. They do not want to sell, but they are saying if these conditions are met in this transfer window, maybe, just maybe, we could consider a sale. For example, and according to multiple reports from around within Newcastle ranks, if let's say an offer came in the region of 150 million pounds, 150 million pounds doesn't necessarily have to be the guaranteed fees, but an overall offer of about 150 million pounds, then Newcastle may consider entertaining the deal or to sell Alexander Isak. But that condition has not been met. But then the other condition is if Newcastle find possible replacements or plausible replacements for Alexander Isak in the transfer window. Now, on that second condition of finding important replacements, they have so far failed. They wanted to sign Joao Pedro, they failed, lost him to Newcastle. Same applied to Liam Delap, lost him to Chelsea. They wanted to sign Benjamin Sesko, lost him to Manchester United. They wanted to sign Hugo Ekitike, lost that one to Liverpool. Present day, they are interested in signing the one Wisa from Brentford, but Brentford are still not budging. They want 60 million pounds for the 28-year-old. And two, they are also considering making a move for Strand Larsson from Wolverhampton Wanderers. Now, Strand Larsson has only entered his second season at Wolverhampton Wanderers. Last season he was there alone, and they've only made his move permanent this summer. So he may not be a little too eager to leave the club just at the moment. So what does that imply? What it implies then is that Newcastle have had a difficult summer. One, Darren Eales did leave, so they went into the summer without a club CEO. Paul Mitchell did leave at the end of June, so they have been in the transfer window without a sporting director, or they entered the transfer window without a sporting director, which made their transfer business really, really hard and managing overall player relationships and their representatives. Ed Howe has done a lot, apparently, to chip in some of these balls, but sometimes it could be, I get the feeling maybe it's a little too much on his plate. Remember, modern day managers are not the traditional managers, the kinds of Sir Alex Ferguson, the kinds of Arsene Wenger, where they literally control every aspect of the business side of the club in terms of how much is spent on what kind of players and that kind of sense, So that's quite different from the modern day managers like the Ed House. So what you have is that the club are saying those conditions have not been met, and they add on to say we do not foresee those conditions being met. In other words, when we assess the market, when we look at suitors, those that have expressed interest in signing Alexander Isak, we do not foresee those conditions being met. I've told you, it's not just about a club coming with an acceptable offer to Newcastle. Newcastle are also thinking to themselves, we must find a replacement. Should we fail to find a replacement, then even though condition A has been met, then we may not be compelled to sell. Then, the other issue is that Newcastle are in a very good position or in a very strong position when it comes to the player's contract. He's only entered the third last year of his contract. So that means even if he stays at the club for another season, he will still have 2 years left to his contract. What does that say? They're in a very strong position. Two, I go back to the professionalism or the lack of professionalism. Alexander Isak is not the first player to want to leave a club. Now, I'll rewind things a bit back. Oftentimes, clubs have made gentlemen's arguments, but because clubs are represented by individuals, when those individuals leave the clubs, it becomes a bit hard to implement those gentlemen's arguments, especially if those gentlemen's arguments were not communicated across board or were not accepted across board. So, take an example. We go to Sporting CP, where apparently the former sporting director, who has since left the club to join Manchester City's ranks, to the best of my recollection, by the way, I stand to be corrected on that. For as long, apparently, he had a gentleman's argument that, well, Victor Gyökeres's release clause was 100 million euros. This summer, he would be allowed to leave for 70 million euros, 60 million euros guaranteed fees, plus 10 expected add-ons. Now, once he leaves the club, somebody else takes over, and those taking over the management of those affairs tell Victor Gyökeres and his representatives, no, we never agreed to that. And our valuation of the player is 70 million euros guaranteed fees, plus 10 in add-ons, taking it to 80 million euros. You can see now. It takes us to another example, Yohan Wissa. Apparently, when Ivan Toney was leaving for Al Ahly in the Saudi Pro League, Yohan Wissa was told, if an offer comes in for you around the ballpark of 26 million pounds, we will let you go. Last season, he went and had a blockbuster season, scored 19 Premier League goals and provided, was it about 4 or 5 assists there, about or 6? And the club are saying to themselves, no, your valuation is no longer 26 million pounds, it's going up to 60 million pounds. And that's what we want if somebody wants to sign you. However, even if they want to sign you and they have that money, we need to find a replacement before we let you go. So the player has expressed his discontentedness for the club failing to honor that gentleman's agreement, but also he has told them he would love to play some UEFA Champions League football, and joining Newcastle gives him that big an opportunity to achieve that dream. However, while he is disgruntled, while he is in protest with himself or with the club for failing to honor those conditions, he's continued to train well with the club. He's not going on a strike. He's gone to his social media to update his bio, to remove everything to do with Brentford. And again, that's understandable. Human emotions, sometimes we do not know what we will do when we get angry or when we are disappointed. That's how I view it with Yohan Wissa. But he continues to train. Luis Diaz was the target for Bayern Munich and Barcelona. But for as long as he remained within that club, he behaved professionally. He came to training. If he was ready to feature in a game, he did play. Alexander Isak, on the other side, did ask not to be included in the club's pre-season tour there, and he was left behind. And that's in a bad protest. He could have easily gone with the club. Wow, you're really smart. You must have been a season ticket holder for Arsenal for 20 years, and you bought Arsenal. You know everything about football. Thank you so much, AR, and your kind comments. He's talking like his father. That's Pralad 69. Good to have you on the broadcast. Kindly consider liking the broadcast, but also subscribing to the channel while you're here. So you can see that Newcastle are saying we do not envision a scenario where all conditions are met for you to be let go this summer. And that is why I've been saying that the best possible solution, if Newcastle remain reluctant to sell and say the player won't be leaving this summer, is to sit on the table with the player's representatives, agree that next summer he will be let go of this kind of fee, or offer him a new contract, which at this point, apparently, he's not willing to sign because he wants to leave, and the only club he wants to join is Liverpool. Again, another difficult situation, which takes me back, actually. Just because you've told the club you want to leave does not make it the responsibility of the club to make you leave or to sell you. No. You've simply said, I would want to go and seek greener pastures. But for as long as you remain under contract with them, you behave professionally and continue to play for them. So I do not envision Newcastle just waking up and sanctioning the move. Love you, my brother. Lovely broadcast and nice humor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Pralada. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And if I'm not pronouncing it the right way, please forgive me. So when I look at all that, Newcastle do not have a replacement so far in this transfer window. They've had a shitty transfer window. They've missed out on majority of their primary targets. Letting go of Alexander Isak when they know they're going to want to compete in the Premier League and qualify, finish within those Champions League places, but while also playing in the UEFA Champions League itself is going to be a whole lot to ask for, or it's going to take a lot, and letting go of Alexander Isak only weakens them. So best solution: sit down with the player, or see at the rest of the transfer window, sit down with the player and his representatives, reach an agreement that maybe next summer you will be let go if a club comes in with this kind of offer, or if offers of this region come in, because he has not read his contract. He has not read his clause in his contract. So that would have possibly made things easy for an exit, and things like that. If he chooses not to play, his valuation goes down, which does hurt Newcastle, but also the club in that communicates that we shall not be bullied, we shall not be compelled to sell when we do not want to sell, because for as long as you're under contract with us, and things like that. So, because once you cave to that kind of pressure, what is it not to say that another player does the same thing, the following summer, 2-3 players, and before you know it, things spiral out of control, So, will Alexander Isak leave Newcastle this summer? I do not think there's a definite answer to say it's a yes or it's a no, because Newcastle say those conditions that would facilitate the transfer have not been yet met, and they do not foresee them being met. So for the side of Newcastle, they're saying he won't be leaving. On the side of Alexander Isak, he says that relationship has broken down, and the best solution is for everyone to part ways. Is for the two parties to part ways and continue without each other. That's Alexander Isak in his statement. That's what he is alluding to when he says that this is where things are. That's where. Okay, what he says in his statement is that why change is in the best interest for everyone, not just myself, because of that broken relationship. Guys, do let me know what your thoughts are on that situation between Alexander Isak and the club. But quickly, let's move away and look at the PFA awards as they were held last night. That ceremony for the Professional Football Association was held last night, and Mohamed Salah wrote history when he won the PFA Player of the Year award for the third time in history. No player has managed that. Others have won it only twice. So there's that. Then two, Morgan Rogers won the accolade for the best, for young player of the season. Matt Sells, is was one of the best goalkeepers last season, and he did make to the PFA team of the year. Matt Sells, Virgil van Dijk, Milos Kakes, Gabriel Magalhaes, William Saliba, Declan Rice. You had Mo Salah in there, Morgan Rogers, Alexander Isak, Chris Wood, and those are some of the players that were part of that team. Ryan Gravenberch and Alexis McAllister, those are the players that did formulate was Morgan Rogers a part of it? But those are some, yes. No, Morgan Rogers was not part of it, but Ryan Gravenberch and Alexis McAllister were the ones part of that PFA team of the year. Then John Strafford did win a Championship Player of the Year, the new Manchester City goalkeeper. So, but congratulations to all winners and achievers. Then Michael Chick is the PFA Premier League 2 Player of the Year. So many awards to women football, coaches. Guy Southgate winning himself an accolade of the 2025 PFA Merit Award winner and things like that. So congratulations to all winners. So it's because Alexander Isak missed that ceremony that he went out to put out that statement that has sort of caused a stir within the footballing world. And, with all sorts of speculation, Newcastle put out their own statement and they are quashing everything. No promises were made to the player that he will be allowed to leave this summer and things like that. Anyways, quickly, let's move on from that and look at the latest from the transfer gossip and speculation as of this morning to make sure before we sign out, because I have a couple of calls already coming in for me, and I cannot tend to them while I'm on this broadcast. But Douglas Luiz to Nottingham Forest, that's a very close deal with Edu Gaspar Dawood really pushing that. For that, Edson Alvarez is destined for a move away from, is destined for a move to Fenerbahce. What is being proposed is a loan move from West Ham United. Then last night, Rodrigo Goes did not make an appearance for Real Madrid. He remained an unused substitute on the bench, further steering speculation that he could leave the club this summer. And yeah, anyways, this is the latest from the transfer gossip and speculation as compiled by BBC Sport. Aston Villa are exploring the viability of making a move for Senegalese striker Nicolas Jackson, but they need Chelsea to lower their £60 million asking price. Bayern Munich's move for Christopher Nkunku has stalled because Bayern Munich want him on an initial loan, while RB Leipzig want him on a permanent deal. Chelsea want to sanction on a permanent deal, and him joining RB Leipzig will facilitate Chelsea's pursuit in Xavi Simons. Then quickly, okay, I thought I'd missed out on the comments. Then Chelsea are set to increase their efforts to sign Alejandro Garnacho for Manchester United. Now it is believed that Manchester United are demanding up to £50 million for the 21-year-old Argentine winger, but Chelsea and Man United are using Noni Madueke's £52 million move to Arsenal as the yardstick to set their asking price. Chelsea remain interested and they are in advanced talks with Manchester United. However, a deal is yet to be agreed upon. The Newcastle are not willing to pay for more than £40 million to try and sign Johan Wissa from Brentford, while Wolves striker Jürgen Strand-Larsen remains of interest to Newcastle. That one we did speak about. That's according to the Athletic. Then Tottenham have targeted Monaco's French midfielder Magnus, rated at about £47.5 million should they fail in their pursuit for Savinho for Manchester City, who is being valued at about £70 million. Then Crystal Palace could turn their attention to Tyler Dibling from Southampton when Ibeleche leaves the club. Now, I mean, I do not know, but I do not foresee this transfer happening because Everton have tried twice and they failed because Southampton value the player at about £50 million and want a future sell on clause of about 20 to 25%. Then Douglas Luiz is set to join Nottingham Forest. That we told you about. That's the former Aston Villa, Brazilian midfielder. Only 27 years of age. Very good player. Was well adapted to the Premier League, scoring goals, box to box kind of central midfielder. But things have not worked well for him at Juventus. The Leeds are poised to sign 25-year-old Switzerland striker Noah Okafor from AC Milan, while Wolves and West Ham are both interested in Spanish midfielder Marc Casado from Barcelona, but they face an uphill battle of convincing him to leave the Catalans. Then Rodrigo Muniz won't be joining Atlanta because Fulham have decided not to sell and did reject a £35 million offer for the 24-year-old striker from Atlanta. So that's according to Fabrizio Romano. Anyways, guys, it's been a pleasure doing this with you at this beautiful morning. Thank you so much, Pralad. Thank you so much, AR, White Gaming Channel, Pedri, Ronaldoski, NC4, RX12. Thank you so much. And every single one of you that managed to join this podcast this beautiful morning, I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.